In abortion debates, people often focus on whether the fetus is a person. But some would argue that question doesn't even matter because a woman's right to bodily integrity and bodily autonomy make the abortion morally permissible either way. The well-known phrase, her body, her choice, ends the discussion. Therefore, in this video, I'll be breaking down the merits of the position and why I ultimately disagree. For starters, I think it'd be important to define bodily autonomy and bodily integrity. So bodily autonomy is going to be someone's right to make decisions about their own body or their self-governance. This could include things like choosing whether or not to get a tattoo, whether or not to engage in sex, or whether or not to take drugs, even if it would hurt them. Bodily integrity is the right to not have one's body altered without one's consent. This could include things like the right not to be raped, the right not to be tortured, and the right to not have medical sterilization forced on one's person. The first argument comes from philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson, where she presents a story where the Society of Music Lovers comes and takes your body while you're unconscious and hooks you up to the world's greatest violinist, because he needs your kidney and you're the only one that can keep him alive. The question here is, does the person who is hooked up to the violinist have the right to exclude the violinist from their body to maintain their bodily autonomy, even if it would result in the death of the world's greatest violinist? If the answer is yes, she can exclude this violinist from her body, then the implication would be that if an adult has no right to someone's body, then a fetus would also not have that right. To give them this right would be to give them special rights. The second argument is called eviction, which comes from Dr. Walter Block. Evictionism distinguishes between killing the fetus and evicting the fetus. This means that the woman has the right to evict the fetus, but she does not have the right to kill the fetus because of bodily autonomy, property rights, and using the gentlest means necessary. This argument asserts that this woman owns her body, just like a homeowner owns a house, and just like a homeowner can kick someone out of their house for any reason, the woman can also kick whoever out of her womb for any reason as well. The only difference here is that being evicted looks different at different points in the pregnancy. Earlier on in the pregnancy, the fetus being evicted looks like dying, but later in the pregnancy, the fetus being evicted allows them to still live, which would be like an induced labor or a C-section. To drive the point home, the death of the fetus in the earlier stages of pregnancy is not looked at as a direct killing, but rather a consequence of eviction. The argument here is that you would still have the right to kick someone out of your house, even if it resulted in their death. Now, before I get into the critiques I have for these arguments, I do want to critique the argument that bodily autonomy and bodily integrity are absolute rights, and they can never be limited in any capacity. Well, this I would just see to be blatantly false because, number one, every right is limited in some capacity, but more specifically, when it comes to the right to bodily autonomy or the right to someone's self-governance, there's rules and regulations that stipulate that we can't, take our pants off and use the bathroom in public property. There's rules and regulations that state that we can't just go around, punching people in the face. And there's rules and regulations that state people can't take their clothes off and go streaking across a football field. And in all these situations, there are limits that society and rules and regulations have put on what we can and cannot do with our bodies. So, I feel like we all believe that there should be restrictions on people's bodies. So that changes the way that we should view this abortion discussion. It's not, hey, why are we restricting people's bodies? It's, do we place restrictions on people's bodies, and does abortion fall within the restrictions that we should put on people's bodies? Now, to address the argument put forth by Judith Jarvis Thomson, I think that this argument is more analogous to a rape case, right? Because the Society of Music Lovers took this woman without her consent, like when she was unconscious, and hooked her up to the greatest violinist in the world. However, in a normal pregnancy, by this I mean where someone isn't raped or, their consent isn't violated. It's a woman who engages to participate in sex, and pregnancy is foreseeable, and she consented, so it was voluntary, and it was ordered to put someone into a state of dependency. So that's why I feel like this example does really bad for explaining the normal cases of pregnancy, and it also is really bad at explaining how the other person feels. For example, let's say that someone else engaged in an action voluntarily and with foreseeability that was ordered to put you in a state where you would depend on their kidneys in order to survive. And let's say, even though they knew this, they still decided to engage in that action, and then once that risk was actualized and you were dependent on their kidneys, they pushed you off, and that resulted in your death. Right? Now, in this situation, it seems like that would be pretty effed up. It's like, hey, you put me in this situation, and now you're going to end my life. The second argument also is not super analogous to pregnancy because it fails to consider that the woman in this case trapped the fetus in her womb without the fetus's consent. In this case, it would be like engaging in an action that forces someone into your house and then kicking them out in such a way that it ended in their death. This also would not seem intuitive. Let me give you a situation that does mimic pregnancy. And this argument is evolved from philosopher Christopher Kaczor, where you're in a room with a button, and if you press this button, you can win $1 million. Sounds pretty great, right? Unfortunately, if you press this button, there's also a 5% chance that a baby will be dangling over a pit of lava, right? So there's that 100% chance that you'll get $1 million, but then there's that 5% chance that a baby will be dangling over a pit of lava. Now let's say that someone pushes this button, they get their $1 million, and the risk is actualized such that the baby is now dangling over the pit of lava. The reason this mimics pregnancy is because the $1 million is pleasurable, just like engaging in sex is pleasurable, and the baby dangling over a pit of lava is analogous to pregnancy because once a woman becomes pregnant, there is a baby that is dependent on her. Moreover, in this example, imagine there's a second button, and the woman can press this button, which will save the baby. However, she'll have to undergo 24 weeks of pregnancy-like symptoms in order to mimic fetal viability. Now, the question here is, should this woman be obligated to press this second button? If yes, the same applies for pregnancy. If no, how many times can she press this button, and how many babies dangling over a pit of lava is too much? 1 baby? 2 babies? 100 babies? 1,000 babies? 1,000,000 babies? I think you get the point. Additionally, it's worth pointing out here that saying that the fetus is not a person won't work because the bodily autonomy and bodily integrity arguments claim to work whether or not the fetus is a person or not. Therefore, that's why I believe that the bodily autonomy and bodily integrity arguments don't hold up to scrutiny, and at best only give us arguments for why we should allow an abortion in the case of rape. However, there have been arguments put forth that try to argue that the abortion is still morally impermissible even in the case of rape, but I won't be getting into those arguments today. Finally, like and subscribe if you like the video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.